Legend of the Galactic Heroes is a series with an amazingly well-constructed setting that has earned it tons of praise in the years since its release, becoming a cult classic in anime circles. One way in which we can see the strong world building of this series' setting is in the way it portrays the interplay of geography and institutions into the development of the many planets and governments. For many decades, political scientists have debated whether the geography or institutions of nations have played a more significant factor in their upbringing. While popular opinion in the discourse shifts very frequently, for the purposes of this, we'll look more at the importance of both things and how it shapes both the Galactic Empire and the Free Planets Alliance, the two premier nations of the Legend of the Galactic Heroes. Looking first at the geography, the most obvious point of interest is the empty segment of space that connects the Empire and the Free Planets Alliance. This region is a difficult to navigate area of space, only traversable by two distinct routes on opposite sides through the place. The Izerlon Corridor, named for the Izerlon Fortress which strongholds the area, controlled by the Empire, and the Phezon Corridor, which has a single planet of Phezon holding control of the region. Phezon is controlled by the Galactic Empire technically, but given a high degree of autonomy to allow for proper trade between Empire and Free Planets Alliance, using this autonomous region as a middleman. As such, it has accumulated huge amounts of wealth despite a comparatively small population to the other powers. Both the Free Planets Alliance and the Galactic Empire have a treaty stating that neither will invade using the Phezon Corridor, leaving it as a neutral area. To look at it tactically, this region of space serves as a choke point for the two nations that makes it impossible for them to invade each other without first passing through. This is significant because it means there are no possibilities for flanks or pincer attacks or any other tactical maneuvers in enemy territory without first getting through the choke point, drastically lowering the options of either invading force. This also gives the Empire a huge advantage since they control a single military path through the area, giving them more freedom to initiate invasions on the Alliance. This single piece of geography can be said to be the major contributing factor to the 150-year stalemate and relative peace between the Empire and the Alliance, as it severely punishes aggressive actions from either side by being easy to defend. As seen in the Empire and Alliance's first military conflict in the documentary that Julian watches later on, the Empire pushes aggressively into Alliance territory and is wiped out, despite having huge numbers advantage. Another geographical element easily overlooked is the way the capitals of the Alliance and Empire are both placed far away from the Izerlon and Phezon corridors, meaning that any invading force needs to extend deep into enemy territory to overtake the other side completely. This placement further de-incentivizes military action, as we see when the Alliance gets very greedy with its advantage after taking the Izerlon Fortress early on in the series, pushing forward without regard for the difficult campaign process. This is taken advantage of by the Empire, and the Alliance is separated from its supply chain, and their invasion crumbles apart, irreparably damaging their military and ending in full-scale defeat of the expedition. The placement of these planets in the galaxy is inseparable from the current state of affairs. Tying into the institutional aspect though, something could be said of this first victory I referenced earlier on the Alliance's part on account of their superior form of government at the time. It is implied that a large part of this first victory on the Alliance's part is due to the better tactics of the military duo in charge of the Alliance's forces, outmaneuvering and surrounding the Empire's forces, which are being led by incompetent nobility. In Why Nations Fail by Acemoglu and Robinson, they outline a criteria for judging institutions by categorizing them as either inclusive or extractive. To simplify, inclusive institutions are those which feature representative policies with little discrimination, such as those found in democracies, which naturally allow for talent to flourish and innovation to continue through merit-based incentives of the economic market. This idea of inclusive institutions aligns very heavily with libertarian values of strong private property laws and free markets. Extractive institutions are those on the opposite end of the spectrum, being ruled by the few and not allowing the masses much say in what occurs, instead extracting the profits of a functioning society and siphoning them into the elite. While there is more nuance to these ideas than offered here, and Acemoglu and Robinson go a fair ways in characterizing the two as less blatantly good and bad, these simple definitions can be applied to our view of the Empire and Alliance in this series. The Galactic Empire, almost entirely since its inception, has been an extractive institution made seemingly for the explicit benefit of rich nobles. While Golden Bomb did actually implement serious reform into society upon founding the Empire, which strengthened its economic and social concerns, he immediately also began to stomp all over the rights of the people and funnel power into a continually smaller subset of elites. This first battle between the Alliance and the Empire shows how the inclusive institutions of the early Alliance have allowed competent leaders to take charge of each sector of government, whereas the Empire has nobles without any real merit or qualifications leading their battles, leading to an Alliance victory. It's a real-time showing of how these representative values can lead to a better-off nation than decaying talent of the Empire. Even more interestingly, though, is that the present situation at the start of Legend of Galactic Heroes flips the script entirely on these two scenarios, as it is not satisfied with simply stating that democracy and representativism are a winning playbook for institutions. Through years of stagnation and unregulated capitalism, among other things, the Free Planets Alliance has begun to lose its political and military fortitude. The democracy and populism has given way to fascism and a military complex through the competition of its political parties, as those values appeal very broadly to the people. Yob Trunicht has gained extreme power and popularity in the Alliance by appealing to the idea that their values are so superior to the Empire's that any amount of militarism or spending is justified, with those speaking out against his party being decried as unpatriotic and losing their voter share, while on a smaller scale, right-wing, military groups suppress political activists. This has led to the Alliance arguably becoming a more extractive institution than the Empire, which sacrifices resources to the nobles and elites surely, but also maintains a largely merit-based government and military, given that the current Kaiser is mostly uninterested in any political or military development beyond the status quo, and instead enjoys his life as a wealthy head of state. While each side suffers from their extractive institutions through incompetent leaders, the Empire at least wins out in terms of decisiveness from having a formal chain of command combined with superior resources and positioning. Something can also be said of the way in which the authoritarian empire makes it easier for Reinhardt to rise through the ranks and gain power due to the way in which it focuses on individual rule rather than listening to the collective masses, letting him attain more power as he proves himself further despite political meddling. This depiction of the two political institutions is incredibly nuanced and interesting, giving the audience tons of ideas to chew on as the weaknesses of democracy and strengths of authoritarian rule are developed on throughout the series. It also can offer critique for the notion that inclusive institutions are less flawed than extractive ones, as the series goes out of its way to show how some things espoused by Acemoglu and Robinson as virtues to development, such as strong private property rights and free markets, come to harm the Free Planet Alliance through their growing military complex and how Fazan holds control over them and leads them in the wrong direction due to their economic reliance on the neutral nation. Jeffrey Sachs, in Ages of Globalization, stresses the importance of geography to development, specifically in the ways in which resources affect how nations develop, which is seen in how the history of Earth plays out in the alternate history of Legend of the Galactic Heroes. Following cataclysm and restructuring, humanity spreads out through the galaxy and makes several colonies to make up for the lack of resources on Earth. However, this leads Earth to oppress these colonies vying for autonomy as they feel superior to the outsiders and are in desperate need of their resources, leaving them lacking and eventually inspiring rebellion. After many massacres and military battles, the colonies outside Earth band together led by a new generation of political heads possessing virtuosic talent in their fields, pushing back Earth's forces and gaining control of the whole area, but in turn leaving the Earth barren and destroyed with a fraction of its population. From here, Earth, now known in the series as Terra, is left mostly forgotten and resourceless, kept from being a political factor in the Empire. What becomes of a region left to itself consisting of a few remaining natural resources and a spiteful, pride-filled remaining population? By the time of the beginning of the series, it has developed into a religious cult controlled by a group of elites who seek to gain political control over the entirety of the Empire and Alliance, fueled by their greed and feeling of being owed their prior status as the ruling class, now left to rot in a harsh planet. Opposite of this, the Free Planets Alliance is allowed to prosper for as long as it does during the Empire's rule due to how removed from military threat they are due to the distance of the galaxy and its nearly unnavigable corridors serving as choke points. Their development could not have lasted as long and been as prosperous as it was without the geographic conditions that were present to deter the Empire from invading at an earlier point. From all of the examples above, we can see the complex interplay between geography and institutions the series lays out in its setting and narrative throughout, with the entire structure of each government and their current conditions being the result of these geographic and institutional aspects. Surely one of the many reasons why the world building of Legend of the Galactic Heroes has been so praised is the ways in which these concepts of development mirror real life, making for comparisons to the real world and giving the audience many ideas to think about, while using its story to show the benefits and negatives of each way of thinking. This is one of many reasons why the series has achieved such cult classic status and become one of my absolute favorite anime. Thanks for sticking around, and I'll see you in the next one.